So I'm talking mostly about Agile at scale. That's sort of the goal of this. First we'll have to discuss what is that, and then we'll have to sort of define some different terms about it, and maybe even talk about some of the different things people have done. I've worked in a few companies that were trying to do Agile at scale. One of them was sort of achieving it. I'll discuss that a little further on. I've been a product manager at a few different companies and also product marketing. So let's start with the basics. What is Agile at scale? And we can answer what is Agile. I mean, I think most people know kind of, but if someone gave me a definition of sort of Agile and some of the different parts of Agile, just quickly, we're not going to spend long on Agile, we'll spend a little bit. So we define Agile. Agile actually never mentions sprints. It's talk about what Agile is. Has anybody here heard of Kanban versus Scrum? Okay, a few people have. Scrum is time-based, which is exactly what you mentioned with sprints. Kanban is feature-based, or task-based, however you want to word it. It's up to you. In other words, you could define a task. You try to keep them, again, short enough that you can get them done in a reasonable time. And you try to guess how long they're going to take. But in general, each person might work at a different one. And you don't have these Scrum meetings before and after, because the whole team may finish up at different times. And when they finish, it's sort of up to the product manager to come in and then work with the person to make sure they know what their next task is. And if it's a team rather than one person, a couple people working on a task, so be it. But you're not going to kind of start the 2 week, see how much you get done at the end of the 2 weeks, and if you don't get it done, then move those things to the next one. Kanban is very task or feature oriented, whereas Scrum is very sprint oriented and time oriented. That's the only difference I put. Both of those are Agile processes. And there are a bunch of other. Can people name other Agile processes? Those are probably the two most popular now. I'll say that. It's kind of defined down to those two. People heard of XP? Extreme programming. It's a little bit different. Less people use it, but some of the things from it, people use heavily in Scrum and others. Particularly things like peer programming. Everyone probably heard of peer programming? That really came from, that really got defined into Agile as part of extreme programming, which is actually one of the oldest processes in Agile, is that. Another one I'm going to hit on later, which is an important one. I think you've heard of Lean. Okay. So what is Lean as opposed to Scrum? Lean is focused on the waste in the process. Scrum does that, but more in the retrospective. You try to see where the waste is, right? Lean, it specifically is focused on the waste. Lean also generally is time-based. You're looking to get a deliverable done. They're looking at usually MVPs, minimal viable products that they're building, and they're looking to see what problems occur in that. And we'll hit on Lean again a little later on when we hit on Agile at scale, which is the main topic of this. So, okay, so we've hit so far on the fact that there are a couple different ones. They're sort of time-based, right, and they're sort of task-based. And there's a lot of different things involving these. You know, Scrum is time-based, Kanban is a task-based process. All of these are Agile. So, given that, again I sort of ask, you don't have to give me the textbook definition, but what is Agile? Does anybody, and then we'll move on from this topic. Yeah.
Iterative development with the continual feedback.
That's really it. And really it was 4 definitions people made. You can look them up on your own, but they were customer collaboration over, which is the feedback piece, right? Over contract negotiations, developing working product over just writing docs. In other words, at the end of it, it shouldn't be a doc that's the important thing, it's the product. Any documentation that fits into the product, so be it. So there were 4 of these basic tenets that are Agile. Any process that fits those 4 basic tenets are considered to be an Agile process. So all the ones I mentioned are those. That's sort of how you define Agile. Just trying to keep our definitions clear before we talk about things like scaling. Because if you can't define what Agile is, then how do you define Agile at scale? So, next question. When I say to you the term Agile at scale, what do people think of? What do people think that means? Yeah, it's generally thought of as how do you make it scale to the organization, more so than getting the features faster, because that's sort of done in the process. But that one definitely is true. Now, but when we talk about that, people say just developers. Okay? Let's discuss that for a moment. I mean, a company starts off with, let's put the CEO, I won't put everything, right? You might have M for marketing, you might have D for development. I'm trying to be really simplistic here, right? And your IT, I'll put as IT. And even sales, right? And again, I'm being overly simplistic here, intentionally. And underneath those, you have a bunch of people. And everyone thinks of it's really just development. And I didn't put product in here. I could put product in separate or not, because there are different ways people bring product in, but P for product. People think, how does Scrum usually, or any Agile process usually start? It starts, let's say, with one smaller development team somewhere in the process, right? For whatever reason, not always, sometimes it's edicted from management, but usually they start with a team, hopefully, to show that it works. Let's say they're using Scrum or something like that. So the question is, if you want to scale it, where do you scale it? You scale it, whoops, from here to here? From one development team to another development team? First of all, yes, you can scale it to the next one and the next one, and each development team can do their own thing. And that works. I've seen that work in companies. There are some problems there, though. Usually, in a medium to large size organization, they're actually like, this is actually a bit more complicated, right? There's somebody here, and then two of them report to that. And sometimes a product is across a few of these, right? Well, what is Agile saying? It's saying be very agile to the business needs. Be willing to change things. If each team is working on their own thing, and they're changing things, how do you develop a roadmap out of that? Now, I'll add in another problem, and I've seen this many times, right? Your CEO and other people catch wind of this, they want a roadmap 3 years in a row. That's a problem everyone has with Agile, right? So a lot of people shaking their heads. So how do you scale so they understand it better? Or does it make sense? What should they know? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, if you're looking for a roadmap and anything time-based, then there has to be some consistency within the teams, even if they want to be agile and develop their own practices. If they're each different, then they come up with different velocities or a different way to project, and then they vary, and then management won't like that. So there has to be some consistency within the teams if you're trying to roll that up in any sort of way and to be consistent.
There's also a lot of other problems that you didn't even bring up there, which is sort of hinted at that. Which is, if people use like Scrum, which is the most popular one, so I'll use that. And that's what I was working at my last company. And there's something called story points, which is supposed to be inside your team to kind of calculate your velocity, how fast you're going. Well, all of a sudden the CEO gets wind of this and says, that's something with time-based. Let me just do estimates based on story points. That doesn't work in 100 different ways. Well, two major ones. One is that the team's estimated differently. The other one is, the goal behind story points is not to estimate them until you get close to doing them, right? Because you don't know how much work it's going to be. Because you might develop part of it in another thing you're working on. But the other team might develop an API you can now use. There are a lot of things going on here. So part of the problem with, exactly as you mentioned, is in my last company, the CEO kept asking us to estimate by his story points and then use that for the roadmap. And I kept telling him, no, this is just stupid. We finally kind of did something like it, but it was like, because all the teams weren't even communicating, because we're all acquisitions, we all did Scrum. That was the good news. We all had different ways to estimate story points. And we don't want to estimate 3 years in advance, 2 years, let's say, because that's for a 2-year roadmap. 2 years in advance, story points. Now we're wasting my team's time estimating everything. Instead of doing the work and things may change and all of a sudden that gets tossed. It just didn't make any sense at all. My point being, there are lots of ways to scale. We'll hit on what's the best way. In a few minutes, I'll at least discuss some of those things. But it can be across development teams, it can be sort of up the ladder, and it can be across to non-development groups. And I think all of those help the understanding of it. So, any questions on that? That's all kind of high level. Yeah.
Well, we might, if it's skipping ahead, we can delay it. How did you resolve the issue with it? So, yeah, what's the idea for managing up, basically? How do you get, what in your experience actually works for projections? Or are you stuck with like the small, medium, large? Or does management need to?
I actually don't mind small, medium, large. I wish I could do small, medium, large. We kind of, honestly, with our CEO, skip past that story, we kind of gave up and just gave him ballpark estimates of story points. He never cared anyways, and never checked whether they're accurate later on. So I just worked with the dev managers of my product, and we came up with what he wanted, which was some time-based estimates of ballparks. And instead of calling them small, medium, large, we call them, quote, story points and call it done. But we had to do that for him. To be honest, my manager who worked right under him understood why we did it. But he was just adamant on, you guys talk story points? I'm going to talk story points. I'm like, that's not the way it works. Unless you want to do it with your management team, which would be great. Yep.
So I don't know much about the space, but I was curious, why is the product, its own cog and not in the center? Because aren't all the departments working towards one common goal?
Well, we're talking the product managers rather than the product itself. Product managers can be one cog. Sometimes product managers sit on the development team. Occasionally they sit under marketing. It's just where they actually sit in the management structure. I agree that everyone's working towards the product, which is why the product manager in many cases has to be the hub for working with marketing on content, working with sales for sales enablement, even though sometimes product marketing does that, working with development team for the deliverables of the tasks, and all these different types of things. But from a company management style, a lot of companies are sort of bringing product out into its own group, even though that's not always the case. And I will discuss a little further on this in a few minutes, because I'm going to hit on some other things like SAFe, if anyone knows SAFe, or Scrum of Scrum. But that's a good question. Any other questions on what I've been covering so far? Because it's all pretty basic groundwork, but I haven't even really gotten fully to Agile and Scale, even a little bit there. Yep.
It's actually a comment. I find it really interesting how product managers are responsible for connecting business, development, and the UI, UX teams. But not only that, we also have to connect management to all these teams because they speak very different languages. Even when you try to connect salespeople to the management C-level, they speak different languages. So I have a couple experiences trying to translate story points to something different, and it's most of the times the solution. You double the estimates or triple the estimates because it's going to be seen as a hard number no matter how many times you say that it's just an estimate.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, in fact, one of the people I've worked with a lot, Joanne Rothman, who's written a lot of books on the topic of product management, argues get rid of story points. She says, look, everyone always converts that into hours anyways, right? And companies that have story points usually have some kind of conversion in their mind, whether they use them or not. So she says, why are we even doing something abstract to get to the concrete? And I know the arguments in Scrum about it. I'm not trying to make that point. I'm just saying that that's her point. I'm not saying I completely have gone to the dark side, but I'm just saying that she made that point at an Agile New England conference a couple of weeks ago. She gave a talk and I was there. So if people want to debate that, why they like story points, why they dislike them, that's fine. But that was her argument. Like, take away some of this stuff that doesn't really seem to help. and just confuses people. Again, you can be Agile fundamentalist as you want or Scrum fundamentalist. I mean, I was just talking to a company Monday that talks about, we got rid of all our meetings, we still do Agile. And they're basically, what they're really doing is doing Kanban essentially, or closer to it, because it's task-based. The product manager goes in and meets with each group as they finish up each feature, which they're calling features, and then work those ones on what the next one is, and you have to kind of know when they're going to finish, so you make sure the next one's in the pipe for them, and bring it in, discuss it with them, and review the last one. Then they have weekly meetings where they present to anybody in the company that wants to see it the features that are coming up. So they do kind of have the review with the company and with the product manager. They've just done it sort of not in a meeting setting. So again, I'm not, you know, you can argue all these things and be fundamentalist about Scrum versus Kanban versus this versus that. They're all guidance, right? I mean, I happen to like peer programming. I've seen it in practice and like it, but that's just me. I find actually you get more done. So, and if people don't know what peer programming is, that's two programmers, one usually saying literally the words and the other one typing it. But you're sort of code checking at the same time, because you're fixing stuff as you go and discussing stuff. The idea being, let's get better code out the first time, rather than having to review it and find problems and have disagreements about those problems and have to meet to discuss those things afterwards. So that came out of extreme programming, and that's a guidance that a lot of other ones use. I also love test-driven development, where you write your tests up front, and then you build to those tests, and then you go from there. A lot of companies don't do that because they find it onerous. I find that it just makes sense, because as a product manager, yes, that's what I agree you should build. Okay, now build that and make sure it works. Does that? I almost don't have to review it afterwards. Not exactly, but it's a much easier review. So, again, I'm speaking a little bit about, are these strictly Scrum? No, those things came actually from Extreme. But they're actually add-ons that Scrum and everyone else use, if you want to. I discussed a few minutes ago, getting back to sort of Agile at scale. I discussed a few minutes ago, they go across the organizations, you go up the organizations. Or you can go many different ways with it, right? The next question is this. You almost always need some kind of major approval, which is okay. I mean, a lot of companies can get that if they're going to scale it anyways. But the next big question is, well, how do you make that work? Because one of the biggest problems I always see, and the biggest failings, is you try to force people to do it. A lot of times developers like it, but not always. Particularly a lot of the older developers I've sometimes worked with. And then a lot of them, let me think of this a second. A lot of them, when you get outside development, say, why am I doing this? You know, what's going on here? There are a lot of groups out there that say you need an engagement model, which means a way to engage. You want to pick people who believe in it, maybe even self-group them, have them work together for a bit, and then expand upon it because they see that it's effective. And I do somewhat agree with that. But I think that's one of the biggest failings. And I'm going to hit on a couple things in a minute here, but I guess the next thing I'll think about is this. There are a bunch of different, has anybody heard of some of the processes that are Agile at scale? Scrum and Scrums? Can you define that one?
As I understand it, just really having the two Scrum teams come together to have what it sounds like a joint Scrum meeting to encourage coordination between the teams.
Actually, I did Scrum and Scrums in the last company, just to be clear. And yes, for us it was two teams because it was we had two teams working on one product. And quarterly we kind of met to do that, but we also met more frequently to discuss stuff. We met all the time to discuss things. There were a couple different things there. One of them was Scrum. A Scrum was useful to have a Scrum team of the product manager, the engineering manager, usually some representative from development, and sometimes other people, like marketing and other people, and even some of the other management are managers as well, like like the VP of product was invited, and the VP of marketing, and someone from sales. Because we're really trying to figure out, where does this product go, and do we all agree upon that, fundamentally. We're trying to build, actually, in some ways, the roadmap of the product, and getting the Scrum teams to be coordinated on that. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You can have the two Scrum teams come together, discuss things more frequently, and periodically bring it up to the others. I will say Scrum is Scrum. So Scrum is Scrum on the scale of different types of processes. There are a bunch of them out there that all do Agile at scale. Is the most lenient. All it's saying is have a Scrum at a higher level. Right? What's the problem with Scrum? There's one major problem here outside of engagement, which is always an issue if teams aren't all doing it. What's another one? You still could have efficiency issues, that's one problem, yes. There's another more basic problem. It's in the name. What happens if not everybody's doing Scrum? Should they know Scrum? Should they know, all this stuff involved with it? I'm just throwing it out there, right? That it's a Scrum-based process, strictly speaking. Now, most of them are because Scrum's the most popular. I'm not going to say that's not a bad idea. I'm just saying that's a question. Particularly since like our marketing and our IT were doing Kanban for inviting them to the meeting. You just have to explain to them what you're doing, and there's some gaps there sometimes.
I think it's hard to synchronize the teams, put them to work together and to deliver something together.
Well, that's true, and that's a hard part about Scrum sometimes, is that it's hard to synchronize them because, what are you trying to do? There's no real guidance too much in Scrum. There's no official deliverables. You have to decide what it is. And there's not a lot of stuff there. And there's a lot of other processes very similar to that. Because they all kind of got stuck in this thing of, how do we get it up kind of, I mentioned earlier about my chart, but how do we get up kind of one tier? So the manager of both those 2 teams, 4 teams, whatever it is. Has anyone heard of SAFe? No? Okay, it's probably the most detail-oriented one of these processes. It's called stands for Scaled Agile Framework. Okay? So what is SAFe? No one here's heard of it, so it's hard for me to. Well, if I said it really was lean plus Scrum, it's true. Would anyone be willing to hazard a guess? And I know this is all guesswork, so please take that as it is. Where would lean be? Where would Scrum be? Remember earlier I mentioned bring this up versus down. Anyone have any guesses? No. Remember to just throw stuff out there. The Scrum is more in the backlog, I guess I'll say. In terms of, it's Scrum for the dev team, okay? So it's Scrum for the dev team, and it's lean more for, I guess I'll say, management. Now they work together, obviously, right? It's lean to the next level when you're working on it. Now why does that make sense in some ways? It makes a lot of sense because the people in management are looking for the waste in many cases and looking how can we streamline things and understanding better. And the Scrum team's just looking to do Scrum, right? Now there is an interesting thing we were discussing earlier here with a few people quietly, but as part of this, they define very specifically. Do people feel comfortable with what a product owner is versus a product manager? Well, can anyone define what a product owner is for? Anybody has studied Scrum?
You're the voice of the business, the development team.
They are. That's a good part of it. They're also the people who day to day work with the dev team to groom the backlog, right? To make sure they get the right stuff for the developers. That's a product owner's job, which isn't everything in product management, right? And that's part of the product, part of the problem. So traditionally, product owners were sort of not the title. They were a role. What do I mean by that? It could be a dev manager who does product owner. My last company, it was technically the dev manager who did that, and I was the product manager. Okay? We worked very closely together, both created stories, but it was his job to make sure they were defined in such a way they were ready for the dev team every time. It was kind of both of our job to approve of stuff together. With SAFe, and everyone gets kind of, right? They define that you have a product owner and a product manager, and they aren't the same person. And the product owner's job is to do exactly what Scrum says it should do, which is groom the backlog, talk to customers as needed, you know, in that part, be the voice of the customer, represent the customer day to day in the dev team, right? Be the person to answer questions to the dev team about what the customer wants. The product manager's job is to worry about the roadmap. Overall, obviously works with the product owner on this, but he sort of owns the overall high view roadmap the CEO wants. He also talks to customers a lot, but also deals with sort of creating the marketing content for the next release. He worries about the release, whereas the product owner worries about the sprints. Does that make sense? I'm not saying any of this is perfect. I'm just saying this is how SAFe defines literally a product owner versus a product manager. And it makes some sense because product owner is a term in Scrum that does exactly what they've defined it more strictly. It just does what a product owner does for Scrum, is his main focus. Yes, he's going to help the product manager for the other stuff. And all that other stuff product managers tend to do, the product manager does. Now, whether that product owner sits in dev or sits as part of the product management team, it's up to you. I personally like them being in the product management team, but that's a little bit up to, I mean, that's not, and anybody can read about Scrum more. There's a whole, we don't have a computer up, I didn't bring a computer, but there's a whole chart that explains the deliverables. It has a whole huge amount of deliverables. And companies that say they're doing SAFe, usually pretty strict about it. Like you are a product owner or a product manager, you have these deliverables to produce, you have this, you have this, you have this. And it's all very specific. And the vision of the overall product is with the product manager. The product owner's job is to drive their Scrum team to get the right stuff done and to find the backlog and do all these things. So if you want to think of it in terms of Scrum, the product manager is sort of at the epic level, and the product owner is at the task level, and they collaborate. And then they actually work together with meetings and things like that to make sure that everything's in sync. How are decisions made between different product managers in Scrum is the question. It's a great question. I mean, in my case, there was one product manager who was working on 2 Scrum teams. So it was pretty easy because I was the product manager. But in most cases, the whole idea is they have a meeting with their manager and sometimes even higher level as part of this. And they bring data to the table to say, here's our needs, here's your needs, what's more critical for the business? And have that discussion, usually with some salespeople too. So we had a meeting with a bunch of people. So it wasn't just me making the decision. Because I'd have the same argument with my product owner, who was the development manager. Sometimes he wanted to work on specific stuff that would help the his dev team, right? And I wanted to work on some features that were needed. We'd have to have a discussion with, the representative from sales, representative from marketing, representative from the exec team, including my boss, to help resolve some of that. But in many cases, multiple product managers get together, they both show their data, and they make an agreement. If it doesn't happen, then you sort of, what you normally do, go to management, which is part of that process. That's similar, by the way, in SAFe. I mean, those meetings are happening in the lean piece, and it's sort of the same type of thing. In some ways, they're similar. It's just that SAFe is very strict about defining all these roles. And Scrum is a little looser about those things. And there are a bunch of other processes that are similar Agile at scale processes which I don't have to run through all those because they're all kind of similar, to be honest. I was looking through some of the other ones, because I've done Scrum and I've studied SAFe, and I was involved with some of the people who originally created SAFe. I looked at some of the others, and they were all kind of like hitting on the same thing with maybe a slightly different variation. Yep.
Are these tools used in certain business verticals, and with what sort of frequency?
Business verticals, you mean different industries?
Yes.
Or well, in software development, I'd say that Scrum is used heavily in most industries I've worked in, even defense and other places. Now, everyone has to tweak it some. I'll say that, depending upon what you're doing. I work a lot with the defense industry, and there the problem is a lot of times they have to tell what their roadmap is to the government before they start building it, so it's a little less agile. But you can always be a little lumpy about that and still use Scrum to get deliverables done and see if something's changing, go back through quicker, rather than the old thing with waterfall where that's stuck until the end. So I've seen it used in those types of industries. In the heavily regulated industries, I've tended to see, in something like Scrum, I tend to see an extra sprint at the end of each before release, where they're doing testing and fixes and everything else and patching, because they have to get it right and get it fixed. So they'll add the quote buffer time in as time at the end to make sure we test it. Now, you're supposed to be testing the whole time, of course, but there's always some integration problems, some other problems that come up. So if you're releasing a product, and it's not just in the cloud all the time, but it's sort of one of these things where it's like a physical product or something, many times you have the testing added in. Some people who are Scrum strict people sort of go, well, that's not right. And they said, I go, like, it's a hard, everyone's defined it differently. It's a hardening sprint piece. We consider hardening up. I've seen that in many places. I mean, other people can say what they've seen, but so it's treated a little bit differently in different industries, but most industries that are doing software are tend to be using less waterfall and more iterative at minimum, and most of them are using some kind of agile. And from there, they're using, the most common one by far is Scrum. Some are using Kanban. Some are just kind of doing their own thing and saying it's agile because they're responding to change. And they're essentially doing agile. And then all of a sudden they say they're doing pair programming or test-driven development. I'm like, which are agile deliverable, which are agile work items. Does anybody know what continuous integration is or continuous delivery? Yep.
Like everything you develop, you pass it through tests automatically, so you don't need to keep testing it all the time.
Right. So basically, you have automated tests that you automatically test as you go, and you even do. Usually, it's coupled with test-driven development, where before you develop it, you develop a test. You put that test into the automatic stuff. Then you can go and keep building, and then when you get done, you have to make these tests fast. You can run right through them the second you get the feature done. You're always integration testing as you go. Now, I'll let somebody else say, what's continuous delivery? Anyone else know what that is?
Releasing a feature as soon as it's integrated?
What?
Just constant releases rather than saving features all up together?
Generally, yeah. I mean, you could do it where you don't do it immediately if you need a few features together, but it's being ready to deliver at any time whenever needed. Now, I'd argue that continuous delivery only works in certain industries. And generally there are things like the cloud and things like that where you really can deliver. I've worked a lot in products that have to be released and people have to download. You can't do that every week or two. Google can do it. And that's why everyone talks about how great it is they can release all the time. Like, okay, but other companies can't. So most companies could do continuous integration if they try hard enough. Not all, because sometimes you have to test on lots of different platforms, you have to access all of them, if you're hardware specific. Sometimes the hardware isn't built yet, if you're building embedded systems. But most companies can test in some way and do more continuous integration. But only a subset can really do continuous delivery if you're delivering in places like the cloud where they don't care. So those are the ones that are slower adopting, to answer your question about Agile, and less have adopted and are a little more industry specific. You also don't want to do continuous delivery if you're in a regulated industry in general. Now, there may be some pieces in there, financial and things like that. There are some pieces we do, but sometimes you have to sandbox it and make sure it's not used on real data. In many cases, medical has the same problem, right? You can sort of continue to deliver if you have something that goes somewhere, but you have to make sure you're not using real data. People are just testing with fake data or old data that you never use to make decisions. Now you want people to test it more frequently, which is why you do kind of this integration and even delivery. And you want to get feedback faster. So those are the things I'd say that people are slower in adopting for good reasons in some industries. If it takes you a few months to get a release process out, which some companies do with physical systems and other things, you can try to speed it up. But at some point you may have regulatory and other things that takes a period of time. You're crazy to try to do that every 2 weeks. Because then you're going to have this whole group just churning the whole time trying to do that. I've had companies tell me, you know, we're producing a medical product that has to go through regulatory every time we release. I'm not going to do continuous delivery of the real product. Maybe a sandbox. I'm going to do continuous integration because I always want to see it's working internally. So, that help answer that question? So I figured I'd bring those up because you gave me sort of an excuse to talk about some other things I like continuous integration and continuous delivery in the right situations. And we were working on continuous integration as the company I was at. Mine wasn't continuous delivery because we had a product, we released an executable. We couldn't ask our customers to keep downloading it whenever we came on a feature. So we were using Jenkins and things like that for continuous integration. So we could, because they don't let scripts, throw the scripts out frequently. We would do nightly builds of the product. And trying to get to nightly tests. We had some problems because we had some hardware that was very specific. And some tests we ran at customer sites we couldn't always get access to. Things like that as part of our test suite. But in general, we did a lot of testing.